I am here today on my podcast, Different Matters, to talk to Mike McRoberts. They haven't given you a knighthood yet, have they, Mike?
No, they haven't, Damien, and thank you. It's lovely to be here.
We are talking about your book, Speaking My Language, which I picked up in Wickles, and I thought, okay, all right, well, this is going to be interesting. We will see where it goes.
I think you described it as a load of white tosh, didn't you?
What I said was, when I picked it up, I thought, this will be a load of woke tosh. So there was a bit of woke tosh at the end. We'll come to that.
All right.
But let's start with, I want to talk about your journey and the start of, and at some point in the early parts of the book, you say, a Pākehā will ask, what do you do? Whereas a Maori will ask, where are you from? Now, you've kind of lived in both worlds. You continue to straddle both worlds. Why do we have those different cultural approaches?
Yeah, that's a very good question, but it's true, isn't it? If you've ever known, if you've spoken to Māori, they'll ask where you're from. I grew up in Christchurch, so there's a third question, which is, what school did you go to? But I think it's because it places us as to who we are in terms of our iwi, our hapu. So for Māori, that's important.
Why? Why is that important? Because it's not in an Anglo-Saxon world. It's not.
Well, it's important because there's. For instance, there's different protocols, there's different language. If you were speaking Māori, you'd probably be able to guess after about a sentence or two where someone might be from. If they didn't sound the RHs, they might be from Whanganui. If they were from Tūhoi, they'd drop the G sound. And so there's those little indicators too. But it's all about your connection to the whenua, and this is something that I explore a lot in the book. So, which is why when they say no he koe, where are you from, it means where are you tied to? What is your connection to the whenua? And mine is Ngāti Kahununu ki te Wairō. So Kahununu from Wairō.
I don't know that really. So why don't Pākehā ask that question? Why if I was to meet somebody for the first time, other than the social niceties, I'm interested to know what they do for a living. What's their social network? That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested to know whether their ancestries are Dalmatian or French or Scottish.
Yeah,
well, French maybe.
Well, maybe that's the difference between the individual and the collective. So like the group that you belong to, your clan, if you like, or your iwi or your hapu.
So you're saying that you think that the Maori society tends to be more collective maybe than
Absolutely. I think everything is about the collective. I mean, we're individuals, but there's always that that thought process around the collective.
Okay.
For instance, when you talk about whakapapa, it's talking about it's not linear. So, I mean, you're going back into history, but it's also those who come after you. So your mokopuna, your grandchildren and their mokopuna. And so you're talking about a collective, whatever things you're doing, you're talking about a collective group of people.
The face in the water.
Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it? So
explain that. It's really cool. I didn't know that.
So yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful lyrical language, te reo Māori, and mokopuna is something that we all know as meaning grandchildren, but what it actually means, it's two words combined, so moko being your face and puna being a still pond of water. So your grandchildren are the reflection of your face in the water.
I think, yeah, because there was a lot of little things like that you pick up in the book, and I guess you picked them up too. But before we come to that, let's just dive back a little bit, because your story, in a way, mirrors what happened in New Zealand, although probably about 2 decades afterwards. So we had the great post-war urbanisation that occurred in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. Your father wasn't really part of that. He happened kind of about 20 years afterwards when he moved from Wairau to
early
Christchurch.
60s. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe just tell that story briefly about how he ended up in Christchurch, and because that was a very profound. Does he still live down there?
He's in Hamilton now, but he was down there for a long time. And actually most of the Māori boys, and they were boys, are sort of 14, 15, who moved down to Christchurch State. Many of them married local Pākehā women. So this was the Māori Affairs Trade Training Scheme, which ran from, I think, the late 50s through until the early to mid-80s. But massive shifts of population, a real migration story, assimilation story. He moved from Wairoa down to Christchurch.
What would Wairoa have been like back then?
Well, he talks about it as being a town of two halves. On one side of the river you had the Māori, on the other side of the river you had the Pākehā.
Mm-hmm.
He'd never been into a Pākehā person's home in his time in Wairoa. So the first time that happened was when he went to my mother's parents' place, my grandparents' place in Christchurch. It was obviously pretty rural. My grandfather, my nanipa on my father's side, ran a shearing gang, so there were 13 kids. And when the shearing gang was in town, they got kicked out of the shed out the back and to find somewhere else to sleep. So, it was pretty rough. It was tough times. And he got selected to go on this trade training scheme, which he was going down to Christchurch to learn carpentry.
Which he considers to be a huge break, a real victory for him. Well, not victory, but an opportunity. Yeah,
because otherwise it would have been life in Wairoa. The meatworks was starting to flourish, I suppose, so he could have got a job there. But he wanted to see the big city. He'd never been further south than Napier before that. So they arrive in Christchurch, and we're staying at Rehua Marae and Hostel in the middle of the city, mm-hmm. which up until even just a few years ago, and you've seen the documentary White Sheep, they still called it a Māori reservation. And, they used to get Pākehā families driving by on a Sunday to come and have a look at them. Because, as you can imagine, I think it was 0.01% of the population of Christchurch.
I think you're right. There was like 200 of them. It's 200 Maori.
It's crazy. And so, so they did their best to fit in, and they fitted in pretty well. They were very well accepted, and that's not the usual thought process around Christchurch and race relations. But
your father did. He certainly settled in pretty well because he married one of the local girls. You can't do better than that.
Yeah, but there was a lot of stuff around that though too. They were, as my mum describes well, being in a mixed marriage, what that was like, being stared at, her having to go, or it wasn't her, but a friend having to go to the flat that they wanted to rent because if the husband or the boyfriend, Māori boyfriend, turned up, they wouldn't get it. Stuff like that. It was pretty prominent. My mum and dad ended up going to Dunedin to live for 2 years because there was just a lot of stuff around her marrying a Māori man.
Dunedin was more liberal than Christchurch. I find that hard to believe.
I don't know if it was more liberal. It's just that my mum's family didn't. They weren't in my mum's family's face every day.
Okay, all right. Your father, though, must have been able to speak the language.
He had a little bit, but it was already changing by then.
So when he was growing up in Wairoa, that wasn't his English was his first language.
I'd say yes. I mean, it might not have started that way. He was definitely strapped at school for speaking to Reo Māori.
Right. Okay.
And I talk about it in the book in terms of truth and reconciliation. Him and I having a kōrero chat a couple of years ago, and just saying to him, look, I completely understand why you didn't teach it to us. I mean, why would you when you'd been strapped for it? But he was also, I guess, in Christchurch. There were things you could do that were acceptable to be Māori. There were things that weren't. So to put down a hangi or to play sport, all of those things, great. But don't question, land rights or anything like that. It's just, it was a tough time for a lot of those guys who would get absolute shit from their workmates about stuff that was going on. I know that because I copped the end of that as well in my career. So it's pretty easy to think, well, they just chose not to do it. But I think there was actually a reason for that. They didn't feel comfortable with it, and they wanted to conform.
Well, I mean, in some ways, moving from Wairoa to Christchurch conceptually wasn't probably that much different from moving from Croatia to West Auckland.
That's right.
And because the change in culture and attitude would have been as stark, and you can see it around that time. The second generation of people who migrated to New Zealand during that period, they typically lost the language. So you see that in I don't know why I'm picking on Croatians, but you certainly, in fact, they're probably better than most in holding on to the language, but you certainly see that with second generation and third generation, the language of their ancestors is generally lost. And so it's not a surprise that with that internal migration, the language was lost. And because of a similar thing had been happening in Auckland, where particularly after the war, there had been a massive urban migration into the cities. And have you read Paul Moon's book on Auckland?
No, I haven't.
Should. It's really good. He writes quite a bit about this, about the dislocation between the young Maori who grew up in Auckland, particularly the second generation, and the estrangement from the iwi. And he writes, the Maori Community Hall on the edge of Victoria Park. And it actually had, when I arrived in New Zealand, they had Maori Community Hall, and then over the years the letters kind of slowly fell off.
I didn't know that's what it was. Okay, right.
I think it's a Grant Thornton or something. But that was very common. For second generation migrants all around the world, they tend to lose the language, and so it's not a great surprise, I guess, from that perspective.
Although, if they want to regain it, if you're from Croatia, you go back to Croatia. But if you want to regain Māori here, where do you go?
Well, yes, and because I think at the time that you were, I think in the 80s, it was something like 20% of the indigenous population could speak some form of te reo. So the language was dying. And its revival is kind of something I want to talk about, because that is such an interesting cultural shift, that there was a collective thought process to say we can't lose this. And so before we talk about what happened, having gone through that, why was it so? I think I know the answer, but why was it so important for Maori to retain the language?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is it's part of our identity. And, I talk about this a lot, and to your point about the Croatians, I guess, for us, it's not a second language, it's our language. And so, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the process of learning it as well. There's a lot of trauma to get through, And I know this because I didn't start learning it until quite late in life. And it's been a real challenge. It's been bloody hard to learn. And I can see why people would be fearful of it, because, goodness me, the...
Keep going.
The emails and correspondence we used to get with people complaining about us using te reo Māori, in a news bulletin, I can see why they'd be fearful, because they were struggling with English in the first place. But, it's a tough language to learn. But it's so linked to everything that is New Zealand, right? That is Aotearoa. So it's all based around the taiao. We have so many different concepts and proverbs around the land, around the awa, around the moana, around the manu, the bird life, all of those things. So it's a great place to learn it. In fact, it's the best place to learn it in New Zealand, because everything is around us.
But let's go back to the 80s, because that's when I think the legislation kicked in around the 70s, about the time of the Treaty of Waitangi Act. But there was a conscious decision, both internally within the Maori community and also within the state, to preserve the language. And I guess I'm interested in, because it was an act of will. The reason why we have the language now is that there was a concerted thought process and actions to preserve it. But why? I mean, why? If I'm a young urban like yourself, successful, integrated into the Pākehā world. What was it 40 years ago, 50 years ago that people said, hold on, we need to preserve this. It's important. It's a tonga. Why?
Yeah, that's...
Because that wasn't happening in the 40s and 50s.
No,
but
it wasn't.
Was happening.
No, it wasn't because we were, we basically suppressed anything that wasn't monolingual, monolingual English-based Pākehā, right? That was it. So you talk to other immigrants that came here, and the dirty looks they'd get for speaking their own language at a train station or whatever. Like conform. You must be exactly like us. But the thing is, it's our heritage. It's who we are as a nation. It's born of this nation. So of course it was vitally important that we hang on to it. And if we hadn't have made those changes back then, it would have died. I've got no doubt about that. For me, and I guess when it comes to the individual decisions to learn the language, for a long time I thought I didn't need it. Yes, I'm Maori. I always said I was Maori, but I didn't think I needed the language. And then I got to a point where I really did. It meant a lot to me. It made me a lot stronger in my identity as a New Zealander, learning the language. And this is after traveling all around the world and seeing other cultures. And so for me, to start learning was part of my process of reclaiming my identity.
So let's, you blame Willie Jackson.
We're good mates now.
So you blame Willie Jackson, who made a somewhat sarcastic, caustic rather than sarcastic. Sorry.
Shitty. I think I said shitty, but
okay. Well, he did call you talented, but his point was that there were Maori faces on television, but they were not Maori perspective. You described yourself as a journalist who was Maori, not a Maori journalist. I suspect that. Well, what do you describe yourself as now? Do you describe yourself as a Maori journalist? Because you are working specifically.
Yeah, I do, because I'm working as a Te Ao Māori editor for NBR. But I think I'd still call myself a Māori journalist, even if I was working in general news. But Willie was right. I was a brown face. I mean, I thought I was doing enough, to...
What was saying Cura at the start of the 6 o'clock news. I mean, that is almost the literal definition of tokenism.
No, tokenism is if you do it once, but we did it night after night.
Okay. So there were many tokens.
I remember actually just after I started TV3 in 2001, and I was filling in for John Campbell, who was reading the news that night. Was reading the news at the time, and I sat down in the chair, and it was me, Mike McRoberts, Kahununu ki te Wairo. There was Carol Hirschfeld, who was Ngāti Porou, and reading the sport we had a Fijian guy called Clint Brown, and someone in the studio said, "Oh my God, look at that! There's 3 brown faces reading the 6 o'clock news, the national news on television." And like, wow. And the coolest thing at that point was that, we were there just because we were there. There was it hadn't been construed that way, but we had 3 brown faces reading the 6 o'clock news. And
and your brother being somewhat disrespectful.
Yeah, my brother, being the smart ass that he is, messaged me halfway through and said, "What the hell is this, Te Karate?"
I thought that was pretty cool. Your decision to say "Kia ora, good evening" has become I'm not too sure. It's become identified with you. It became the subject of a documentary talking about your going back to Wairau. Why did you do that? Because that was a conscious decision as well, to say "Kia ora." You couldn't speak the language. You considered yourself, well, I don't know, did you consider yourself predominantly Maori back then?
Yeah, I did. I did think I was Māori, but it was an interesting one because, as I talked about in the documentary, Kia ora, good evening, I used to get great anxiety about speaking Māori, about reading Māori words, and even saying Kia ora, good evening, in case I got it wrong. And And I'd sit out the back and not so much kia ora, good evening, but I'd practice whatever I was going to have to say over and over again, trying to get the vowel sounds right and all that kind of thing. Because at least I wanted to do it well, even though I couldn't speak the language, I wanted to represent it well.
Yes.
But, I tell you what, of all the things I did in television, and I had, a pretty decent 30-year career in television, 10 years at RNZ before that, kia ora, good evening is the thing I'm most proud of. Like the impact that it had straight away of that vulnerability, of being vulnerable, of talking about the whakama we talk a lot about. So that's the shame or the embarrassment of not knowing your language, of potentially stuffing it up, of looking stupid. It's alive and well. It's a taniwha waiting to beat you over the head if you let it.
But other than Willie Jackson, who would know?
Oh, everybody would know.
But if you said kia ora wrong?
No, I mean, it's as well. I once got criticised for the way I said tana koe, and I said tana koe instead of tana koe. And so, which is fair enough. I mean, I'm Māori, I should get that right. I was just being lazy, I think. But no, it's important.
So why make the decision? So when did you start saying kia ora on television? Was that right at the very start?
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, TV3 started long before TVNZ ever did it.
Well, you took over the seat of Philip Sherry, not director, but I think that reflects a shift in TV3. So that's an evolution in itself.
Yeah. So it's and it was a way of being inclusive. In fact, we changed kia ora, good evening to tēnā tātou katoa, which is welcome everybody.
Okay.
So and that was how we finished up, I think, in the last few years that I was at 3.
Any pushback at the time when you started doing that?
Oh, undoubtedly.
No, inside TV3.
Oh, no, it was fine. Yeah, and encouraged. Like we had some good representation in our newsroom, and we leaned on it. So I remember Glenn Kine, who was I think the chief executive of the Australia, New Zealand, Japan branches of Warner Brothers Discovery, saw the documentary Kia ora, good evening before it went to air. He got an early screening of it and rang me from Japan the night before and just said, "This is amazing. It's really special." He said, when I get back, I'm going to offer Te Reo Māori lessons to all the staff.
Okay.
And I said, fantastic. I said, well, make sure you're the first one to take them. Because that stuff has to come from the top. And we're seeing that a bit now. Like I'm actually doing stories on this at the moment. New Zealand businesses who are incorporating tikanga Māori and Te Reo and Te Ao Māori principles into their workplaces. And it's been fascinating to see how that's going and why they're doing it.
I might come in and talk about that because I
thought I saw a wry smile there.
Well, I've got views on that, and so our views may not align. But that's
okay.
That's all cool. The decision then. So you've gone through your life. You are the product of a mixed marriage. Your children are the product of a mixed marriage.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't teach your children te reo when they were growing up.
No.
But then you make the decision as still a relatively young man. I think we're the same age, which is a bit concerning for both of us, I suspect. You then make the decision, because you talk about this at the end of Kia ora, good evening, the documentary about doing an immersion course, which you do for 12 months. So you've been learning the language, you've been doing okay, but you thought, okay, no, I'm gonna take whatever it was, 9-10 months of effectively full time, whilst you were still working at TV3. So goodness, your employers were benevolent to tell you. If anybody at Waterstone tried to do that, they would short shit. But talk us through that decision, because that's a hell of a commitment.
Yeah, it was. And probably if I'd known how intense it was going to be, I think I still would have done it, actually. It just, to me, it seemed like the right thing. And kind of as you get older, it's so much harder to learn. So to throw yourself into an intensive situation like that. So this is at Takiura Wānanga, which is in Mount Albert.
Yep.
And the course that I did is a year-long course called Rumaki Reo. And Rumaki Reo literally means to drown in the language. And full immersion you do, like some days you wouldn't get back to the surface to take a breath. It was really full on. But my decision process around that was, it was going to be the best way of me learning without, spending the next 7 or 8 years at night classes. And to surround myself and literally immerse myself in the language. Amazing people, like the stories of sacrifice that others had made to go there. I felt incredibly, as you pointed out, and rightly so, my employers were amazing. So what it meant for me is I just started a few hours later than I normally would. I still did a lot of stuff during holidays and things like that, or stayed later to.
Why did they grant you such leeway? Because
I think they knew what it meant to me.
Sorry?
I think they knew what it meant to me.
And maybe what you meant to them?
Yeah, I mean, I was prepared to step away to do it. So, I was prepared not to work. And I guess that's the thing. If you have that level of commitment, then other stuff will follow. So, as it turned out, I'm so glad. Well, in fact, I could have waited a year and then had the year off to do it anyway.
Yeah, but then Todd would have missed out. You sound like you bullied your wife Heidi into doing it as well, at least in parts.
No, I didn't bully her. Would she
agree with that? Some pressure.
No. She so we did online learning together, but she didn't go to Takiura Wānanga. No, she was very much the Wānanga widow. In fact, we got married 4 days before I started at Takiura, and then that was me for the next 10 months. doing studying and every weekend and most
job.
Nights. Yeah,
she's a lucky woman. You also mentioned Orini Kaipara.
Orini Kaipara, yeah.
Kaipara, yes. Because that was interesting reading the book, knowing the arc of her career. So she's now a Maori Party MP. She won the election, which was an impressive result. Just talk me through why did you write? So knowing what we know looking back is that it would make sense, but obviously you didn't know at the time she was going to become an MP.
No.
So what was the story there? Why was her role so significant?
Just because she had the skill and ability to help me, and to do it in a way as someone who was a native speaker. So
was that her first language?
Yes, it was.
I think you say in the book.
Yeah,
it was
her first language. Yeah, and
where did she learn it?
Well, she learned it going through Kohangareo, Kura Kaupapa, Hoani Waititi, so out west, but also from her whānau.
So her parents enrolled her in those full immersion courses from day one.
Yes.
So that's so interesting, because that kind of leads into what I was saying before, the active decision to preserve the language. And if you're going to preserve the language, you need actually to take kids and put them in it so it's their language right from the get-go, because otherwise you don't have that base of native speakers to do so.
Yeah, no, and that's true. And I feel ashamed to say that I didn't put my kids through that. They remind me that on almost a daily basis. But their mum and I had a look at it, and at the time, this is going back 20 years. Mike, people were saying, it's too confusing to learn two languages. Well, that's just bullshit.
No, I can guarantee you, whatever decision you made, they would have chastised you for the afterwards. So that is the nature of children. Why'd you make me learn that, Dad? Outrageous. So there was no winning on that one. So you've done the full immersion course. I just want to talk a little bit about the acceptance of it. So my knowledge of te reo. What does that mean? We use te reo for the Maori language interchangeably, but what is reo?
Reo
Te means the.
Is language.
The language.
Yeah, the language. So te reo Māori is the Māori language.
Te reo Māori, the Maori language.
So you could talk about Pākehā reo, English.
But there are so many Pākehā reos. You know, a Chinese Pākehā?
No.
So Pākehā is simply white.
Well, it's a white New Zealander.
A white New Zealander. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's talk. I want to. I got a few other topics I want to talk about, but I want to.
I'm worried about the smirk that I keep saying. I'm just like.
The smoke.
The smirk. I'm just waiting for the next bomb.
No, there are no bombs. I can assure you. The idea of, so I wrote a column, which was a fantastic troll, some 4 or 5 years ago, about what is a Maori, and of course it was a troll because it's, this right winger, what is a Maori, you know, and my answer was that, and I think it's correct. I think that Maori has become a cultural more than a genetic identity today. I think so. You look at the concept of if you whakapapa Maori, you can be Maori. So there is a blood's the wrong term, but there's got to be some ancestral link before you can claim to be Maori. I mean, I could not get away with it. David Seymour can, although his connection to Ngāpuhi seems pretty tenuous to me. But he meets the cultural definition, and I find that so interesting coming from an Anglo-Saxon worldview. It doesn't make sense to me. Explain it to me. Why? What does it mean to be a Maori? Because if I was to add up your bloodline, it would come up to less than 50%.
It would.
But you identify yourself very strongly. Culturally, you've gone to the efforts. You've got the what do you call it, Tomoko?
Tamoko. My tattoo. Yeah.
So you've made an enormous commitment to identify culturally as Maori, and maybe more accurately to the various iwi. But answer the question: what does it mean to be a Maori? Because there are some people who quite clearly whakapapa Maori who do not see themselves in that fashion.
Yeah, and I think to go back to your first point, I think you're right in terms of the importance of the cultural aspect of being Maori. And it's become, I feel, more important. For me, I'd always identified as Maori, but now there's a chapter in the book which is He Maori Aho, which is I am Maori. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment that I felt that I am Maori. You know, that I had my connections to my whakapapa. I understood, principles like manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, all the tangas, and it made sense to me as to who I am. These are things that were kind of floating around in my personality for a long time, and what my immersion into Te Ao Māori did was bring all those things together and really demonstrate to me who I am. And that.
Is that because you do fit into two worlds?
I do. Yeah, I do. I'm still very. I should have pointed this out at the very start. He maunga teitei te maunga o te Maoritanga. So the mountain of knowledge is a lofty one, and I'm still climbing up that mountain, that maunga of learning Māori and learning to be Māori. I'll probably be climbing it for the rest of my life. So I don't want to come across as an expert. What I'm talking about here are my own feelings and my own observations. And you're right. I think in terms of that old way of, what is it, blood
quantum.
Blood quantum, yeah. Which is, I mean, come on. I think as I say in the book, if it doesn't matter how much milk you pour in, the coffee's still coffee. So
that's like you're a homeopathic Maori.
Blue top or green top. No, but that's increasingly going to be the case, isn't it? Because you look at every family in New Zealand these days, and there is a Maori person in that Pākehā family somewhere,
yeah.
and vice versa. So this is probably controversial, but I think at my goal in life, and I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, is that we become one iwi. That we have different hapu, but we are people of Aotearoa, we are one iwi.
Ngāti Pākehā.
No, not Ngāti Pākehā.
I think
you're in a waka on your own.
That is often the case.
You're in a waka that's still sitting on the beach because the rest of us have taken off.
Who's that got a waka? Oh no, it's sinking. That idea though of what is Maori. So when I wrote that. Actually, no. I want to pull you up because I don't think that's not. You said I am Ngāti Hini Pahenga.
Ngāti Hini Pahenga. That's my hapu.
Yeah. So because I don't think you didn't, or maybe you did say I am Maori, but that the concept of iwi. So which is something that the more I look into this, the more I begin to understand the importance of iwi and hapu, because if you'd asked me 10 years ago, Maori were a homogenous group, the more I mind you, don't laugh, so did you.
No, I know.
You were in your 20s before you knew what an iwi was.
I know. And look, I was going to say thank you. Thank you for doing that, because, we most certainly were not taught that. And it was rubbish. It was rubbish what we got taught.
Yes.
And so the fact that you've gone out of your way to look into that and find out about that is fantastic. I love it.
Thank you. Well, Chris Finlayson, have you read his book?
Yes.
That is the one on because he's written two. One on politics, which is all right. The one, because I interviewed him on the treaty settlements, which was interesting, and his view, and that really drove home the significance of iwi.
Yeah.
Was the term Maori, did that exist? Where did that come from? Because if you go back to a world before the Europeans arrived, there probably wasn't really a concept of the outside world. This was, I am Ngā Pui, you are Ngāti Puro, you are Ngāti Toa. The mental universe of the people who lived in these islands would have been Aotearoa itself is a relatively recent invention, it's been adopted to mean something it didn't initially. But where did the term Maori come from then? Well,
in Te Reo Māori, there is Māori, as in I am a Māori man, and there's also the word or the kupu Māori with a little m, not a big M, which means normal. So you talk about wai Māori being like natural water.
Yes.
So Māori means normal.
Right, and so that word then became adopted
as
for everybody.
For the collection of different iwi and
for non-Europeans, effectively.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because that is quite interesting, and I noticed, because I don't really like it, and I can't kind of articulate why when people put their iwi affiliations. And maybe that's my Anglo-Saxon individualist aspect coming out. It's like, I don't care what your iwi is. I'm interested in what you think, what you do, your worldview. That's what I'm interested in. Whether you are Ngāti Toa or Ngā Pui or a combination of both, I don't care. And so it's not to say I don't like it. It doesn't have any resonance for me when I see people do that. But I now understand in a way that I wouldn't have 10 years ago why people do it.
Okay. And do you know enough now to know if someone says that they are Ngāpuhi, that they're from up north.
Yes.
Right.
Well, because when we had the debate here with Helmut Modlik,
which was fantastic, by the way,
Martin made some comments about Helmut and his ancestors being Hana Heke, and I said, no, he's Ngāti Tua, that's Te Rapraha. Understand. If you're going to compliment or insult the man, do the courtesy of getting his iwi right, for heaven's sake. I like Helmut. He's a really interesting guy. I worry about, you're familiar with the whole thing about the Nelson tents?
Yes. I've done numerous stories on the Nelson tents.
Christ almighty.
The longest running New Zealand property settlement. Property litigation in our history.
It's going to be one of the most expensive as well.
Well, they will if they keep putting it off. I think just get on with it. I mean, you look at all the issues that Nelson are going through now as a city, with job layoffs and things like that. Imagine that money in developing that area. It'd be fantastic. At the moment, there's patches of the city of the town that can't be used because it's still under question. Just get on with it.
So why can't Ngāpuhi sort their stuff out?
Ooh.
Come on.
I don't think it's for me as a Ngāti Kahungunu man to be giving any instructions as to what Ngāpuhi do. It was funny actually. I was up there last week doing a couple of stories for MBR. And they're getting on with stuff. I mean, they're miles behind everyone else, obviously, but they've just done a joint venture with T&G for berry farms up there. They've got the water reservoirs coming on for avocados. So
is that Shane Jones money?
It is. It is. Uncle Matua Shane.
He's an interesting guy.
That's pretty much my day now at MBR. I just follow Shane Jones around to see who he's giving money out to.
Just handing out the go left, right and centre.
All of them incredibly deserving, I have to say.
Whatever. A couple of other things I want to. You spoke about the king.
Kingi Tahitia.
Tahitia. So this is also interesting. Was that the first time Kingitanga had gone to Waitangi?
It was the second, and the first had been many, many, many years before then. So it was the first time. Probably in I think in living memory, you'd say.
And that was his last Waitangi day.
Yes, it was. Yeah. But it was such a. I mean, that whole movement of kotahitanga that he instigated, and again, I'm showing my ignorance of growing up, not knowing anything, but I knew nothing about the kingitanga movement before recently. And then to actually get the chance to cover that, meet him.
Was your iwi part of the kingitanga movement?
Yes, it was. Yeah. In fact, he, during the Cyclone Gabrielle, he went over and took a whole bunch of workers with him and did a lot of clearing up around Wairoa. Apparently, they couldn't get him off the digger. He was a former truck driver, so I loved it. But I really admired him. I thought he just had a wonderful common sense, centrist kind of view. I remember before one of those hui that he, I think it was the hui taumata in Hiritonga and Hastings and Hawke's Bay. And Te Pāta Māori had come out the day before and talked about an independent Māori parliament. And Kingi Te Heitia, gets to the end of the day, and that's kind of dominated discussion when there could and should have been other things discussed. And he gets up there and goes, we don't need another parliament, do we? Got enough trouble with one. And that was it. It was done. It was gone. And so, but he used his humour and I think common sense just to bring things together. And you look at the way all of that process was handled last year, and it was done beautifully. Like there was no trouble. There was, it was done with a lot of aroha, and it attracted thousands and tens of thousands and families, and you just look at the way it was done, and it was I thought it was one of the biggest years for Māori ever, and I just happened to be a Te Ao Māori editor at the time, which was wonderful.
Well, goes to say the power of a few words.
Although I do remember I covered the hikoi when it came over the Auckland Harbour Bridge, And you'll know, you probably have seen there's a handful of subscribers who read MBR and subscribe to MBR
I'm one of them.
Who hate everything I write.
Oh no, I'm not one of them.
No, some of the comments are pretty interesting, but there was one which is very funny, I thought. So I'd done this story, I'd gone down and videoed the story of, I thought there's probably 10,000 people who came over the bridge that day. It was massive, massive crowd. Just kept coming and coming, lots of pictures, wrote the story, thousands walk across the bridge in protest. And one of the subscribers came in the comment section and said, or an alternate headline could be, millions didn't.
That's true for every protest. I used to joke that I'd only ever seen one coronation, thinking of the English coronation. I might get to see another English coronation, but I'm sure as hell not going to get.
Phil Goff might have said the same thing, didn't he?
Well, no, different context. The new Maori Queen is only 27, so we will not see another one. I read this word, the Maori word for coronation,
koronehana.
Koronehana. I want to ask this question: where? Well, I think I know that because I looked it up. There is a Maori language commission. It wasn't entirely clear where the words come from. Where? Because that clearly is a derivation of the word coronation. Who comes up with these words?
Ngāpuhi are very good at them. There's a lot of looky-likey words up there. But
what did you call them? Looky-likey. Oh my God, that was so good. You're going to get cancelled for that, not me. Looky-likey.
No, but those kind of those similar words. There's actually a word for it, isn't there? I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's not alliteration. What is it? Something like that.
No, I can't remember. It's like I'm sitting on Air New Zealand, and the answer to some question is Bulgaria, and then they have a Te Reo version. I'm like, come on, that's just use Bulgaria.
Well, there is a language commission, and I think they do sit and accept or decline words every year. I'm not certain of that though, but.
Are there words that bubble up organically because that happens in English, right?
Yes.
And the
Imara for computer. I don't know where that came from.
Because that's not a.
Well, we didn't have computers back in.
No. But the word is so different from the word computer that it must be some other.
Yes, I'm not sure. I'm still building my vocabulary, but.
Well, you can add to it. Well, see that is different. But part of the power of English is that it soaks up other words,
yes.
and I think that is a threat to Te Reo in that we see words like mana and kai and mahi. They become English words. We steal the words. And then it becomes a real struggle to maintain the internal consistency of the language, which I think is going to be a struggle going forward.
They become New Zealand English words, don't they? You know, so you wouldn't hear that being. But I mean, I think that's part of it too. Is that the language, the Māori language, has become a lot more accepted and used, particularly by the younger generations. Like I've got a 25-year-old son who's in London. And he very much identifies as Māori. He's wearing his All Black jersey or Warriors jersey every other weekend. And he said he rang me the other night. He said, "Dad, I've never had so many hongi, and none of them are Māori."
Okay, all right.
You can't ever imagine yourself doing that at Piccadilly Circus, going up and giving someone a hongi because they're a Kiwi.
I don't even like hugging. This is, I don't understand where it came. Like the last 10 years, all of a sudden, if you're a woman you don't know that well, and there's kind of an expectation you're going for a hug. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I'll hug family members and people. I don't understand how that I just feel it's a breach of my own personal tikanga.
Fair enough.
So I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy with a handshake. Respect for tikanga must go both ways.
I won't hug you at the end. I might hug you because we're finished.
Let's tackle some really easy stuff. If we go back and we have a look, there's a little bit of New Zealand data on this. It's more of an overseas data. What is wrong with particularly the African American communities is that the disintegration of the family unit, and so you are seeing where I can't remember the name of the New Zealand researcher who does some of the stuff, but she goes back and she has a look and says in the pre-war era and in the early 50s, I can't remember, I'm going to make it the number, 70-80% of Maori were growing up in two-parent households. You fast forward 40, 50 years and the number has shrunken to well under 50%. And you see an inevitable consequence of delinquency and crime and everything that flows from that, and gangs and all that sort of stuff. Now, it's potentially a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem there, I think. Is it what's causing it? But why do we see this problem? What is causing this? I mean, I've been a guest of Her Majesty. I've seen it up close. You see such a disproportionate group of young men, and from my anecdotal evidence, it does appear to be the descendants of that urbanisation that find themselves in trouble.
For sure, yeah.
So why is that happening? And because the other thing I'm interested in is this revival that you and so many other people are part of, is that part of the solution?
I think it is. I think it absolutely is. I think, what you've just described is inequity, right? And so that's loss of land, loss of language, loss of identity. And it shows itself in many forms. It's expensive inequality. It really is. When you look at the prisons being filled, the hospitals being clogged, the economy being limited. And so when you turn that around, and part of it starts with regaining that connection, regaining that language, but also just a general feeling of feeling good about yourself. That means a lot. And you look at kids these days, particularly Māori kids, who have gone through that immersion process, who are unapologetically Māori. You look at some of the ones that are coming through now, the so-called kohanga generation, and they're very solid. They know who they are. They know what they're about. They know their futures. You look at the Māori economy, for instance, and the number of SMEs that have been created in the last 2 or 3 years. Those are entrepreneurial Māori kids who are starting their own business because they don't want to work for someone else. Now, they're not all going to go on to be listed companies, but it's got to be good, and this is a direct result of the empowerment and the uplifting of Māori.
Because that's something I want to believe, because there is no alternative.
No,
because I disagree with you when you say it's inequality. I think, I know from my own background, it was not inequality that led me to do the things that I did that got me some free accommodation back in the day. So I'm not. It's purely my own decisions. But the from my experience of that time and following on, the cultural disconnect of those young men was so profound, and they found meaning and value in the criminal organisations that what I am hopeful of is that these young men and women, but it's predominantly men that get into trouble, can find it in some of the stuff that you are championing now. Yeah,
and potentially a few decades ago it might have been the church, right?
Yes.
But now it's more targeted and more specifically about their heritage, their culture, which I think is a really good thing. The more that can happen, the more uplifted they feel, and I'm glad you see that, because there's so many people who seem so fearful that by uplifting Māori, some other part of society is going to drop. It's just not the case. You look at, there's just never been a stat that's shown that. In fact, it's always the opposite. I was reading the other day, doing some research for something I'm working on, and the immunisation stats for kids, for New Zealand kids, right? So back in the early 2000s, there were two separate immunisation rates. It's 90% for non-Māori and 70% for Māori. Tony Ryle comes in, and the first thing he does is change that. He said, well, they should all be. The target should be 90% for all of them. Great. So that's equality. But what he did then was actually put some money into making sure that happened and raising the levels in DHB. What happened was both levels rose because they were capturing not just Māori, but all the other hard-to-get-to areas and children. So, it's got to be good. It's got to be good when Māori are uplifted. That's why we all, and I know a lot of people can't see that means we all get lifted up, but we do.
It's, no, I agree with that. My own perspective is I'm very suspicious of welfare. I think welfare in the short term is a very powerful thing to get people out of trouble. But I think welfare it destroys the very infrastructure of the family units that we have relied on for tens of thousands of generations to provide the organisation. And so in this country, you had hapu, you had iwi, the state comes along and says, don't worry about your whānau because we will provide for you. And okay, in the short term, hey, that deals with that particular situation. But then you create an incentive structure that has, because I think the structural unit of iwi and so forth was damaged in two ways. One, the urban migration, because I think it's very hard to maintain that at a distance, as your father found out. But then also I think welfare has a corrosive and destructive effect, because if one of the ways that we can influence our children is through the control of resources. Now, it's a pretty blunt instrument and it's pretty crude, but you are the one that understands and cares for your child more than anybody else. The state comes along and offers to provide that resources. It dilutes the parental authority. Now, in the first generation, the effects of that aren't particularly profound. 3 or 4 generations later, you end up in enormously dysfunctional situations. And I think we're probably going to disagree on that. But and I don't necessarily know what the solution is, because you can't just turn around to say to 17-year-old single mothers, no, we're going to turn the tap off because we don't want your 14-year-old sister to go down the same track. You can't do that. That's not a functional solution. And I don't know what the answer is, but maybe some of the stuff you're talking about is.
Yeah, look, I don't totally disagree with that either. I guess the thing is, what led them to be in that position in the first place, and was it because they were in a low-paying job that was easy to cut, or was it because they had poor education or whatever? So, but when something does happen, like a teenage pregnancy or whatever, then look for ways to upskill that person and make them feel better about themselves. Give them the ability to get a better job, to be a significant player in the workforce. So
this is Bill English's kind of wrap around stuff.
You say that with such dismay, Damien.
I have an awful lot of respect for Bill English, but I disagree with him on a number of issues. But he is a gentleman. He's done God's work. Just we finish off. So, as I said, when I picked up this book, I knew a little bit of your story, obviously, because you read the news for so long. I arrived in New Zealand, I think 87, 88 from Australia. back when Philip Sherry was still. I identified with Philip Sherry. He's an old white man.
And have you been trying to look like him ever since? Is that right?
I'm finally getting there, Mike. I'm finally getting there. I enjoyed getting to understand your story, understanding your ancestors were, what's the word, fecund. Who was it? I was doing some research on Richard McRoberts.
Yes, Richard and Erin and McRoberts.
They had 13 children.
Yeah. They must be close to about 10,000 descendants, yeah. 10,000,
that is insane.
Yes, this is why the workforce in the next 20 years is going to be Maori and Pacifica in New Zealand.
Well, my father's parents, who were from Ashburton, they had 12 children, 8 survived. My father had 5, my mother had 4, I've had 1. So the catastrophic drop in fertility, you're not much better, right? You've had 2.
My father was one of 13 as well, and they had a Bill and a William. And
oh, really?
As siblings, yeah, a Bill and a William. There you go, ran out of names.
But they were using European names.
Yeah, well, I think they had Maori names as well. My dad had a Maori name. His name was Waitani, but everyone called him Mac, so, you know.
Do you have a Maori name?
I don't. When I was at full immersion at Takiura Wananga, they called him Makairi. Makairi, which is basically the Maori name for Michael.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. All right. The Mike McRoberts book it's a journey in 2 ways. It tells your story, but it also tells a wider story. Your story, I think, is about 2 decades after what happened in the rest of New Zealand. So you've got the post-war migration. Your father kind of goes on his own journey about 2 decades after that. Mm-hmm. Then you've got your desire to reconnect with your whānau, and with the tattoo, and if you haven't seen the movie, the documentary, I like Kiora, Good Evening, more than White Sheep, I think, because that told such a personal and powerful story.
Yeah,
and it is pretty powerful. But it tells the story of your going back, and I did not understand why you did it. And maybe at the start you didn't understand why you did it, but I understand it. I understand it now. So thank you for writing the book.
Well, that's the greatest feedback I could get.
Okay.
You understand it. Thank you, Damien.
All right.
E mihi ana ki a koe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.